This is Anna Patterson with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. We're going to go ahead and kick it off. The top three things that we're going to emphasize today. We are urging folks to contact their senators because housing counseling funding has been zeroed out in the draft fiscal year 26 House budget. Also lifting up that Attorney General Jeff Jackson joins a lawsuit against the Trump administration for disaster mitigation funding. And then the third thing is that the National Low Income Housing Coalition has released their out of reach report for 2025. And so we'll highlight a few of the findings for North Carolina. On federal updates, as we mentioned, we're really asking for folks to contact their senators' offices to really emphasize the importance of this critical piece of our housing ecosystem. For some context, on Sunday, July 13th, last week, the House Appropriations Committee released their proposed fiscal year 26 Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, or THUD budget. And in their proposal, it zeroed out the HUD housing counseling funds. This House bill has passed through markup, which is a process where they review and propose different amendments to the bill in the full subcommittee. And it went before the entire House Appropriations Committee this past weekend and passed along party lines. The Senate Appropriations Committee is expected to consider their version of this on July 24th. And so that's why we are asking folks to contact their senators today and to tell them to preserve the $57.5 million in HUD housing counseling assistance in the fiscal year 26 budget. As many of us know, housing counseling is an essential service in communities across North Carolina, not only creating pathways to homeownership for many first-time and first-generation home buyers, but also supporting members of our communities and protecting their hard-earned investments. If the fiscal year 26 federal budget does not include any funds for housing counseling, North Carolina will lose an estimated $1.4 million in funding to housing counseling agencies across the state. In 2024, this HUD funding enabled these agencies to serve over 50,000 households across our state. And so without these funds, thousands of families in North Carolina will lose essential community services. So we're asking you again to please tell our senators, Tom Tillis and Ted Budd, how the loss of HUD housing counseling assistance will impact you and your community today. We're going to include not only a link to contact them in the housing call notes, but also a sample script for folks to use if you'd like to go the email route. We'll also be including different links and resources from our national partners, including the toolkit for opposing cuts to federal investments in affordable housing, a storytelling guide, a sign-on letter, as well as the advocacy hub. Moving on to state updates and starting with disaster recovery, just updates around Tropical Storm Chantal. The NC VOADs are going to hold a coordination call today at 11:30 a.m. and are asking to hear from responding agencies to understand what goods and services need to be covered and what can be provided and distributed. If you are interested for locally organized and a comprehensive roundup of resources for survivors and helpers, you can visit this mutual aid link that we'll have in our call notes run by Triangle Mutual Aid, and we will have a version in the Spanish as well. Attorney General Jeff Jackson has sued over $200 million in cuts to water, sewer, and flood protections. Last week, our Attorney General and 19 other state attorneys general sued the Trump administration over their decision to end FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC program. When asked, Jackson mentioned that his hopes are to restore funding that was previously promised to local governments before its cancellation. Before its cancellation, BRIC provided over $200 million to protect North Carolina's infrastructure, including water and sewer services that have been devastated by storms, including Helene and Tropical Storm Chantal. As we've mentioned on previous calls, the North Carolina Department of Commerce's Renew North Carolina Single Family Housing Program is now accepting applications. This is a centralized housing rehabilitation, reconstruction, or replacement program that is going to prioritize low to moderate income families with seniors age 62 and older, children and or disabled household members impacted by Hurricane Helene in one of the eligible 29 counties. There are four different ways to apply, and we have links and details on each of those ways in the call notes, as well as the different qualifications and documentation needed to apply. On the legislative update side, still no state budget. The General Assembly is expected to reconvene again next week on July 29th, and there will also be a subcommittee on hurricane recovery and resilience on the 30th. So we'll make sure to keep you in the loop about that. On local headlines, lots of important things to lift up and a few disappointing things. One, for example, we learned last week that the New Hanover County Commissioners disbanded their Workforce Housing Advisory Committee. And so this is during a quite an interesting time to make that type of decision, especially considering all the funding that's going away at the federal level, the limited funding available at the state level. And so pretty disappointing news out of New Hanover County for such critical funding and housing infrastructure to be going away. And another headlines we have, there's a new Wake County shelter for people in need that is moving closer to final completion. And there are also notices from Mecklenburg County about evictions surging. And there are additional prompts and urgent calls for housing support in the Mecklenburg area for this rise in evictions. Moving on to reports and resources. Every year we highlight this report. It's also one of the reports we use to create our county profiles that we release every year at the beginning of the year. And so this data from the 2025 Out of Reach report is what will inform, will be part of our county profiles for 2026. So last Thursday, the National Low Income Housing Coalition released their 2025 Out of Reach report and ultimately shows that affordable housing continues not to really be attainable anywhere in North Carolina for lower wage earners. On average, full-time workers need to earn at least $27.14 an hour in North Carolina to afford a modest two-bedroom at fair market rent in North Carolina. And if you look in the state's most populated regions, this housing wage is as high as $36 an hour. But the affordability crisis isn't limited to our urban areas because a minimum wage earner making $7.25 an hour in rural North Carolina still has to have an estimated 2.2 full-time jobs or work 86 hours per week in order to afford a modest one-bedroom apartment and must work 107 hours per week to afford a two-bedroom apartment. We have a blog post about this year's Out of Reach report here where we dive into the data a bit more. And really, I think this report does a really good job at just reminding us that this crisis is not just about individual choice or supply alone. This is connected to our broader ecosystem, to living wage, to working, to wages, to what our community's options are. And so this is just making an even greater case for why we need solutions that address each element of the need to be able to address it. On the other report side, the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency releases a report talking about veterans homelessness and the work being done and how it's decreasing in North Carolina, veteran homelessness. And then also out of the Housing Solutions Lab at NYU, there is a study that examines what work requirements and time limits could actually mean for federal housing assistance. And out of the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, a report looking at rental assistance time limits and how it would place more than 3 million people, half of them being children, at risk of eviction and homelessness. We have several webinars and different events that we want to lift up as well. On the webinar side, tomorrow, the National Alliance to End Homelessness and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities at 1 p.m. will be having a webinar about learning from and protecting emergency housing vouchers. It's part of a series that they're doing in partnership with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And then also on July 24th, so on Thursday, Navigating Uncertainty in Federal Funding Streams for Housing, also hosted by the Housing Solutions Lab and the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy from 1 to 2:30 p.m. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. As always, if you have any questions or want us to dive into anything a bit further, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will talk to you next time.